Chapter 1. The auction. The chandeliers glittered like captured stars, but no light could warm the cavernous ballroom. The scent of beeswax candles and crushed roses mingled with something far less wholesome: anticipation, greed, and the metallic tang of desperation. A hush rippled through the audience as the velvet curtains at the far end of the room were drawn back. Behind them, Evelyn Moreau stood waiting. Her hands, pale and trembling, clutched the folds of the gown she had been forced to wear. Silver satin, stiff with embroidery, clung too tightly at her waist, the corset squeezing her ribs until each breath felt like penance. Jewels glittered at her throat, cold and unyielding, and her hair, her midnight hair, had been twisted into a style that did not belong to her. They wanted her to look like a prize, a treasure, a commodity. She felt like none of these things. Her heart thundered as the master of ceremonies, a sleek man with eyes too sharp and a smile too false, stepped into the light. His voice rang out, echoing against marble columns. "Gentlemen, you have been most patient. Tonight we conclude our gathering with a rare jewel indeed, a lady of refinement, of beauty, and of unmatched delicacy. I present to you Miss Evelyn Moreau." Applause, laughter, a murmur that spread like wildfire. Evelyn's legs betrayed her. As she was ushered forward by unseen hands, she felt the press of eyes upon her, hundreds of them, each gaze like a brand upon her skin. She kept her chin lifted. It was the only shred of dignity she could cling to, yet inside she wanted nothing more than to flee into the night. The auctioneer spread his arms wide as though unveiling some masterpiece. Her lineage, though fallen upon misfortune, is of respectable stock. Her manners are refined, her education most adequate. She is unspoiled, untouched, and available this night to the highest bidder. The words struck like whips. Available to the highest bidder. Her father's debts had swallowed everything. Once they had lived in a modest but happy townhouse on the outskirts of Mayfair. Her father, a scholar, had filled the halls with books, laughter, and music from the pianoforte. But misfortune had a way of arriving in storms, not raindrops. His investments had failed. His health had crumbled. By the time death claimed him, creditors had already stripped their home bare. And Evelyn, his only daughter, had been left to the wolves. A voice from the crowd interrupted her thoughts. £200. 400. Laughter followed the rising bids. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She had known this moment would come, but hearing the numbers, the cold exchange of her worth, made her stomach twist. She tried to look away from the crowd, to focus on anything else: the marble floor, the gilded cornices, the tapestries that told stories of battles and romances long past. But every glance forward showed her men in velvet coats and jeweled cravats, their faces masks of desire and arrogance. 600, 800, the auctioneer beamed. "Gentlemen, surely such beauty commands more. Shall we say 1,000? The number dropped like a stone in her chest. £1,000 for a night, for her. Another voice, this one sharp and mocking. 1,000 and not a penny more. I like her, but I've stables that cost less to keep." Laughter rippled again. Evelyn bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing back tears. She would not cry before them. She would not give them that triumph. And then silence. The laughter ceased. The murmurs dwindled. The crowd parted like reeds bowing before a wind. He stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed not in gaudy silks, but in the austere black of a man who cared little for finery He moved with a quiet authority that hushed the room. His dark coat brushed the floor as he walked, and his boots struck the marble with steady, unhurried steps. Evelyn lifted her eyes and found his, storm grey. That was the only word for them. Grey, yet lit with some fire beneath, a tempest barely contained. His face was strong, sharply cut, with a kind of features sculptors tried to capture in marble. But it was not his looks that struck her. It was the weight he carried, the invisible shadow of a man who had known war, or loss, or both. When he spoke, his voice was steady, deep, and absolute. £5,000! Gasps broke the air. The auctioneer nearly stumbled. 5,000, my lord? The man inclined his head, as though he were merely confirming the price of a horse, not a human soul. 5,000? No one counted. None dared. The gavel struck. Sold. The word rang in Evelyn's ears. Sold. She had been purchased for more money than she could even imagine, and yet she felt no victory, no relief, only a new kind of fear. Who was he? Why would a man like that spend such a fortune on her? And what did he intend to do with her? The hall erupted into murmurs as the gathering dissolved. Evelyn was led from the stage, her knees weak beneath her. The world blurred around her until only one thought remained. Her fate now lay in the hands of Lord Sebastian Ashford. Chapter 2. A Night's Bargain. The carriage rocked gently over the cobblestone streets, its wheels rattling against the stones like muffled drum beats. Inside, the lamps glowed low, casting long shadows across the plush velvet seats. Evelyn sat stiffly on one side, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the silk of her gown whispering with every anxious movement. Across from her, Lord Sebastian Ashford sat silent. He was unlike the other men she had seen at the auction, where they had preened and laughed, their smiles wolfish. He appeared carved from stone. The faint light caught the edges of his face, the strong jaw, the sharp lines, the faint scar that ran just above his left brow. His gloved hands rested loosely on his cane, though there was a weight in his posture that made her wonder if he was always prepared for battle. The silence between them stretched unbearably. Evelyn could hear every creak of the carriage, every hoof-beat of the horses, every thunderous pulse in her own chest. At last, unable to bear it, she whispered, "Why?" He turned his gaze upon her. Those storm-grey eyes unsettled her more than the silence. Why would you spend so much?" Her voice shook, though she fought to steady it. £5,000 for a single night? You could have had anyone for less. You could have had— "I did not want anyone else," he interrupted quietly. The words stole her breath. Still she pressed, "You don't even know me." Something flickered in his expression, a shadow, a memory. "I know enough." Frustration mingled with fear in her chest. "And what is it you know, my lord? That I am a daughter sold to pay her father's debts? That I have no fortune, no protection, nothing left to offer but myself?" His jaw tightened. He looked away, out the small carriage window, to the dark streets rolling past. "I know," he said slowly, "that you did not belong in that room." The words struck her differently than she expected. He had not spoken with pity, nor with gallantry, but with something harder, conviction. Evelyn fell silent, unsure how to respond. The carriage slowed, the sound of iron gates opening carrying through the night. Moments later, they arrived before a great manor. Its silhouette rose against the moonlight, tall and forbidding, ivy crawling up the grey stone walls. The windows glowed faintly with firelight, and the vast oak doors opened as though the house itself awaited its master's return. A servant in livery bowed low as Sebastian descended from the carriage. He extended a hand, not commanding but steady, waiting. Evelyn hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers into his. His grip was warm, firm, grounding her as he helped her down. The manor loomed before her, and she could not decide if it was sanctuary or prison. Inside, the air was cooler, scented faintly of polished wood and old books. A fire roared in the vast entrance hall, its warmth spilling across the stone floor. Paintings of stern ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her. "You must be tired," Sebastian said at last. His voice was softer now, though no less steady. "You will be shown to a chamber. You will not be disturbed." Evelyn blinked, startled. "Not disturbed?" He studied her, as though weighing whether to explain. At last he said simply, "I did not buy you for what those men intended." Her breath caught. "Then why?" she whispered again, for she could not understand. He held her gaze, and for a brief moment she saw through the mask of coldness, a flicker of something else, some wound she could not name. "Because," he said quietly, "some things should not be left to wolves." With that, he turned to the butler who had appeared at the doorway. "See that Miss Moreau is given all she requires. She is under my protection." The words echoed in her ears. "Under my protection." As the butler led her away, Evelyn felt her knees tremble. She had been sold, yes, purchased like chattel, but what manner of man bought a woman only to give her safety? Her chamber was spacious, though solemn, its canopy bed draped in heavy curtains. A fire had been lit, casting the carved furniture in a gentle glow. She stood in the middle of it, trembling still, uncertain if she should cry or scream or fall to her knees in prayer. When the door closed behind her, she sank onto the bed. She did not sleep. The morning came draped in mist. Evelyn awoke to the faint chime of a clock somewhere deep in the house. A maid entered quietly, bringing breakfast on a silver tray. The girl was young, her eyes curious, though she said little. "My lady," the maid murmured, setting the tray down. Evelyn almost laughed. "My lady." She had been called many things, but never that. When the maid left, Evelyn rose and went to the window. The estate stretched wide before her. Gardens, wild and tangled with ivy, sweeping fields beyond. It was vast, and yet strangely lonely. A knock sounded. She stiffened. "Come in." The door opened, and Sebastian stepped inside. He was dressed plainly for a lord, in dark trousers and a simple waistcoat. Though the cut of them suited his frame, he carried none of the arrogance she had seen in other men of his station. Instead, he seemed, she searched for the word, wary. "You rested?" he asked. "As well as one might," she replied carefully, folding her hands before her. He inclined his head. "Good." The silence stretched again, though this time Evelyn felt a strange compulsion to fill it. "Will you tell me why, my lord?" she asked softly. "Why you did what you did? You cannot expect me to believe you spent such a fortune merely for charity." His gaze lingered on her, and for the briefest moment she thought he might dismiss her question. Instead, he stepped further into the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Because I know what it means to be trapped," he said at last. His voice was low, heavy. To have no choice but the one others thrust upon you. The confession startled her. She opened her mouth to ask more, but he had already turned toward the door. You need not fear me, Miss Moreau. You are safe here for as long as you wish to remain. And with that, he left her again, leaving Evelyn with more questions than answers. That evening, Evelyn wandered the halls, unable to stay confined in her chamber. The manor was vast, lined with shelves of books, portraits of ancestors, and the kind of silence that comes from too few people in too large a place. She found herself drawn toward a warm light spilling from one of the doors. Peering in, she saw him. Sebastian sat alone in the library, decanter of brandy untouched beside him, letters and maps spread across the table. His posture was rigid, his face shadowed in the firelight. He read and reread the same letter, his jaw tight, as though each word reopened an old wound. Something inside her stirred. Curiosity, sympathy, perhaps even recognition. She knew what it was to carry burdens alone. You watch the world, she said softly, unable to stop herself. He looked up sharply, startled. She stepped into the room, clutching her skirts. But you let no one watch you, she continued. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, unexpectedly, his lips curved into something almost like a smile, though it held no joy. And you, Miss Moreau, he said, are far too bold for someone who should hate me. I do not hate you, she whispered before she could stop herself. He studied her, his grey eyes searching hers, and in that charged silence, Evelyn felt something shift, subtle, fragile, dangerous. A bargain had been struck that night at the auction, but perhaps she thought it was not the one either of them truly understood. Chapter 3. The Lord's Secrets. The manor was a world of whispers. Servants moved quietly through its halls, their footsteps muffled on ancient carpets. The air smelled of beeswax, leather-bound books, and faintly of damp stone. Though Evelyn had been told she was free to come and go, she felt both guest and prisoner within its walls. Lord Sebastian Ashford had not sought her company after that night in the library. Days passed where she saw him only in fleeting glimpses, his tall figure striding through the corridors, his coat sweeping behind him, his expression unreadable. Yet everywhere she turned, his presence lingered. In the faded portraits of his family, solemn men in military dress, stern women with eyes that missed nothing. In the rows upon rows of books in the library, volumes of history, strategy, and philosophy, many worn with use. In the polished saber mounted above the hearth in the great hall, its steel catching the firelight. The household whispered of him when they thought she was not listening. His lordship never smiles. Since the war, he is not the same. He has no wife, no heirs, only ghosts for company. Evelyn wondered at the truth of it. That morning she found herself in the conservatory, the glass panes dripping with condensation, the air thick with the scent of roses and damp earth. She traced her fingers along the petals, remembering her father's garden once upon a time. The memory made her ache. Miss Moreau! The voice startled her. She turned to see Sebastian standing at the entrance, the light slanting behind him. My lord, she said, dipping into a small curtsy out of instinct. You need not do that here, he murmured, stepping inside. She tilted her head. Do what? Bow, he said simply, as though I were a king instead of a man. Something in his tone made her bold. Are you Not a king in this house, my lord. His lips curved faintly, though not into a smile. A king rules willingly. I am a prisoner who wears his chains more comfortably than most. The words unsettled her. A prisoner, but you are master here. No one commands you. No one? He met her gaze, and the weight in his eyes made her chest tighten. We are all commanded by something, Miss Moreau. By duty, by loss, by guilt. Titles do not free us. They bind us. He turned then, as if to leave, but Evelyn's voice stopped him. Then what binds you, my lord? For a long moment he did not answer. His hand rested on the frame of the glass door, his shoulders tense. Finally he said, "The past," and with that he left her, his footsteps fading into silence. That night, Evelyn could not sleep. The words echoed in her mind. The past. She lit a candle and wandered the halls once more. The manor felt different at night, its shadows deeper, its silence heavier. The portraits seemed to watch her more keenly, the tick of the grandfather clock louder, as though time itself judged her for prying. Drawn as if by some invisible thread, she returned to the library. There, amid the flickering glow of dying embers, she found him again. Sebastian sat in a high-backed chair, a letter unfolded in his hands. His brow was furrowed, his jaw set, yet his eyes, those storm-grey eyes, looked far away, as though seeing not the paper but some battlefield etched in memory. "Do you never sleep, my lord?" she asked softly. He did not startle. Slowly he folded the letter, setting it aside. "Sleep is a luxury I surrendered long ago." Evelyn stepped closer, her candle casting long shadows across the shelves. "Because of the past you spoke of?" His gaze lifted to hers, sharp as steel. "You ask too many questions, and you give too few answers." For the first time, something like amusement flickered across his face. "You are not afraid of me, are you?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." "Why?" "Because I do not believe you would harm me." Silence followed, heavy and charged. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as though she were a puzzle he could not solve. "Your father was a scholar," he said suddenly. The mention of her father's name made her stiffen. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know the circumstances of those under my roof." His tone was not unkind, merely factual. "Your father lectured at Oxford once, did he not?" "Yes," she whispered, "before everything." Sebastian nodded slowly. "He wrote papers on history, strategy. I read them when I was younger." The confession startled her. You read my father's work?" "I did." He looked away, his voice dropping. "It guided me once, when I was far from home." Evelyn's breath caught. "In the war." His silence was confirmation enough. She stepped nearer, her candlelight brushing his profile. "What did you see there, my lord?" He closed his eyes briefly, as though fighting off a memory. When he opened them again, they were shadowed. "Too much," he said softly. "Too much to forget. Too much to forgive." Evelyn wanted to press further, but the grief in his voice stopped her. Instead, she set the candle down and lowered herself into the chair across from him. "If you cannot forget," she whispered, "then perhaps you should share it, so it does not bind you so tightly." He studied her in silence, and she wondered if she had overstepped, but then he said quietly, "And what binds you, Miss Moreau?" Her throat tightened. "Loss and shame. My father's debts consumed everything, and now I am this, a woman sold to the highest bidder." His gaze sharpened. "Is that what you think you are to me?" She faltered. "What else could I be?" Something flickered in his expression. Anger, perhaps, but not at her. At himself? or at the world that had forced them both into this bargain. "You are not property," he said firmly. "Not here, not to me." The conviction in his voice made her chest ache. For the first time since her father's death, she felt seen. Silence stretched between them again, but it was not the cold silence of strangers. It was something more fragile, more dangerous, the silence of two people circling truths neither dared yet to speak aloud. In the days that followed, Evelyn began to learn more, not from his lips, but from the manner itself. She found medals locked in a cabinet, their ribbons faded but polished with care. She discovered maps marked with ink, the borders of Europe scarred with battles. She noticed how he carried himself, always alert, always as if an enemy might rise from the shadows. Sebastian Ashford was a man of secrets, but not all secrets could be kept forever. For outside the walls of the manor, whispers were growing louder. London's society had begun to talk of the beautiful girl purchased for a knight who had not reappeared, of the war hero lord who had spent £5,000 to keep her, and of the enemies who would not let such a scandal rest quietly. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Manor. The manor at Blackthorn rose from the mist like something carved out of memory. Grey stone, ivy clinging stubbornly to its walls, the long avenue of trees whispering secrets as the carriage rolled forward. Evelyn pressed her gloved hands together in her lap, her nerves taut as the horse's reins. Sebastian sat across from her, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the carriage lamp. His jaw was set, sharp as chiseled marble, but his eyes flickered to her more than once, betraying something restless behind the mask. When the carriage stopped before the grand steps, servants rushed forward. A tall, silver-haired butler bowed low. "Welcome home, my lord," he said, his eyes sliding briefly to Evelyn before flicking back, tactfully neutral. Home, the word rang in her chest. For him, perhaps. For her, this was a gilded prison. Inside, the halls stretched wide and cold, hung with portraits of stern ancestors. Candelabras sputtered faintly, throwing shadows that seemed to breathe. Evelyn trailed her fingers along the edge of an oak banister, trying not to betray her awe. She had never seen such splendor, not even in the townhouses of the wealthy. "Your chambers are prepared, my lady," the housekeeper murmured, dipping a curtsy. Evelyn's head lifted sharply. "My lady?" The title burned her ears. She cast a glance at Sebastian, but he only nodded, as if this were expected. Her rooms overlooked the eastern gardens. They were grander than she could have imagined. Tapestried walls, a velvet chair near the hearth, and a bed so large it seemed made for royalty. A fire had been laid, filling the chamber with warmth. Evelyn touched the heavy curtains, then the polished silver combs on the vanity. It was all too much, and yet achingly beautiful. She stood by the window, staring at the moonlit gardens, when she heard the door open. Sebastian's reflection appeared in the glass. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. "You are dissatisfied," he said, his voice low, almost resigned. She turned to him, startled. "No, it is more than I deserve. That is precisely the problem." His brow furrowed. "Do not speak so. You deserve comfort, safety." Her lips trembled with the bitter laugh she held back. "Safety? I was sold at a gaming table, my lord. To you? What safety is there in that?" His eyes darkened. For a moment he did not speak. Then, with a sharp exhale, he stepped closer. "You think I do not know?" The ugliness of that night? His voice grew rough, almost raw. But tell me, was it worse than the fate Redgrave had planned for you? I could not allow him. You could not allow him, or you did not wish him to have what you had claimed? She cut in, her tone trembling between defiance and despair. The silence between them thickened. His gaze bore into hers until she thought she might crumble under it. Then suddenly his hand rose, hesitated, and finally brushed against her cheek. Evelyn froze. His touch was careful, as though she were glass. "You are not a prize," he murmured. "Not a debt, not a possession. Do not ever think I see you as such." Her breath caught. The fire crackled behind them, filling the silence with a dangerous intimacy. And for the first time since that fateful night, Evelyn's heart whispered something she had not dared admit. Perhaps Sebastian, the Dark Lord of Blackthorn, was not her captor at all. Perhaps he was the only shield she had. But outside the manor walls, the shadows lengthened. In the smoky back rooms of London taverns, Lord Redgrave poured himself another glass of wine, his lips curling into a smile that never reached his eyes. "She thinks she is safe," he murmured to the man at his side, "but no woman slips from my grasp. Blackthorn may shelter her for now, but mark me, she will be mine again." The game was far from over. Chapter 5, Flight into Darkness. The note lay on the polished desk, ink still damp. "You gave me freedom when no one else would. I cannot cost you more. Forgive me." When Sebastian woke and found it, a cold dread stole over him. The words were careful, neat, yet each stroke was steeped in desperation. She was gone. She had slipped away in the darkest hours, while the household slept. For the first time in years, fear struck him like a blade. He had kept her hidden, watched the shadows for Redgrave's reach, but he had not thought she would run from him, from safety, from him. He threw on his cloak, ordered his horse saddled without delay, and rode hard into the pale, fog-drowned dawn. Evelyn's breath rasped as she stumbled through London's back streets. The city felt different now, no longer the familiar maze she had once navigated with practiced steps. Fog curled thick as smoke, muffling every footfall, making shadows loom like phantoms. She clutched her shawl tighter, pressing herself into narrow alleys, always glancing back. The weight of Sebastian's kindness pressed on her chest like a stone. He had bought her, yes, but he had also shielded her. He had given her warmth, a chamber, dignity she had never known. She could not repay that gift by chaining him to her fate. If I can disappear, if I can endure, perhaps he will be safe. But the thought had barely formed when a hand clamped around her wrist. "Well, well," came the silken hiss she dreaded. The little dove strays from her cage. Redgrave emerged from the fog like the devil conjured in flesh, his coat rich, his gloves immaculate, but his eyes gleaming with hunger. Around him loomed two of his men, brutish shadows closing off escape. Evelyn's heart lurched. She wrenched against his grip, but his fingers bit like iron. "Did you truly think you could run from me?" His smile was a slash of cruelty. "I warned you, Evelyn. You were mine the moment I laid eyes on you. Blackthorn stole you from me, but fate always rights itself." "I am not yours," she gasped, struggling. "I will never be yours." His laughter was low, chilling. "Oh, you will, by choice or by ruin." He leaned close, his breath hot against her cheek. "And when you cry for mercy, remember, you might have had comfort in my hands. Now, I will make certain you pay dearly for spurning me. She twisted, her nails raking his wrist, but he only tightened his hold. Her knees trembled. Despair clawed up her throat. Then the crack of a gunshot shattered the fog. Redgrave jerked, his grip loosening as pain ripped through his arm. He staggered back with a furious curse, clutching his sleeve where crimson bloomed. Evelyn gasped for breath, stumbling away as her captor reeled. Her wide eyes lifted, and there he was. Sebastian emerged from the mist, tall and dark as retribution itself, his cloak billowing, a pistol steady in his hand. The lamplight caught the fury etched across his face, his eyes blazing like coals. "You will not touch her," he growled, every word a death knell. For a heartbeat, the streets stilled, the city, the fog, the world itself, holding its breath. Evelyn's knees weakened, relief, terror, and something fierce and overwhelming surged through her chest. He had come, he had ridden into danger, into the very jaws of Redgrave's trap. For her, Redgrave's men moved first. Lunging forward, Sebastian's second shot cracked through the air, grazing a cobblestone near their feet and sending one sprawling. "Another step," Sebastian warned, his voice like thunder, "and I will not miss." Redgrave bared his teeth, his usual poise fraying into raw hatred. "You think you can keep her, Blackthorn? She'll drag you down, as all women do. You of all men should know that." Sebastian's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking. "Better to fall with her than live in your filth." The villain's eyes narrowed. "Then so be it." With a sharp whistle, his men retreated into the fog, dragging their wounded master with them. But his final words slithered back through the mist. "This is not finished." Silence fell, broken only by Evelyn's ragged breathing. Her hands trembled. She swayed, and in an instant Sebastian was there, his arms catching her before she collapsed. The pistol clattered to the stones as he pulled her close, shielding her as though the fog itself could devour her. "Evelyn," he whispered hoarsely, his breath uneven against her hair. "Do not ever do that again. Do not run from me." She clung to him, her tears dampening his coat. I thought leaving would keep you safe. He will never stop, Sebastian. He will destroy you because of me." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were fierce, unyielding, yet burning with something that made her chest ache. "Listen to me," he said, low and unshakable. "You are not my burden. You are not my ruin. Do you understand? You are the only thing that has pulled me out of the dark. If I must face Redgrave, then let it be so. But I will not lose you." Her lips parted, words lost in the storm of his vow. Her heart pounded, torn between fear and the staggering truth that had always been there, unspoken. He had not only saved her, he had chosen her. And in that fog-choked street, Evelyn realized there was no escape left. Not from Redgrave, and not from the man who held her as though she were the very breath in his lungs. Chapter 6. The Truth of Hearts. The manor loomed out of the mist as the carriage rattled up the drive, its lanterns swinging like tired sentinels. They had not spoken the whole journey back. The silence between them was not cold but heavy, laden with words unsaid. When the door closed behind them, shutting out the night, Evelyn felt the weight of the house descend like a shroud. She, stood just inside the grand hall, her shawl clutched in trembling fingers. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly, throwing long shadows across the marble floor. "You should not have come," she whispered at last, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the flames. "They will ruin you because of me." Her words hung there, brittle and desperate. Sebastian closed the door, his back to her. His shoulders were rigid beneath his cloak, but when he turned, his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weaken. He crossed the space between them with slow, deliberate steps. "Evelyn," he said, a name like a vow. "Do you not see? They could ruin my fortune, my title, my name, but none of it matters." He stopped before her, his hand rising to tilt her chin upward. His touch was warm against her chilled skin. She had never seen him like this. No mask, no walls, only the raw edge of a man stripped of everything but what he felt. "I cannot lose you," he murmured. Her breath caught, tears trembled on her lashes. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why me?" he exhaled, a sound half a laugh, half a plea. "Because when you look at me, you do not see the ghost everyone else does. You see the man I wanted to be before I lost everything. You are the first person in years to make me feel as though I am still alive." The admission undid her. The walls she had built, the fear, the shame, crumbled in an instant. She lifted her hand to his cheek, her fingers brushing the line of his jaw. "You are alive," she said softly. "You saved me, not only from Redgrave, but from myself." For a long heartbeat they simply stared at each other. The fire cast them in gold and shadow, their faces inches apart, the air between them charged like the sky before a storm. Then his lips brushed hers, hesitant yet burning with the restraint of a man who had been denied too long. The world narrowed to the warmth of his mouth, the tremor of his breath, the steady thud of his heart against her palms. He deepened the kiss only slightly, as though asking rather than taking. When he drew back, his forehead rested against hers. "Say you will stay," he whispered. "Say you will not run from me again." Evelyn's chest ached with the force of what she felt. She had been owned, bought, discarded by men who saw only their gain in her. But here, in this moment, she felt cherished, not owned, wanted, but never as a possession. She cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs brushing away the faint shadows beneath his eyes. "I will stay," she breathed, "if you'll still have me, even knowing the danger." His answering smile was small but unshakable, a light breaking through long darkness. "Even knowing everything." He kissed her again, slower this time, as though sealing a promise. Outside, the wind rose against the windows, rattling the panes like distant drums. Somewhere in the night, Redgrave plotted his next move, but for that brief moment, within the walls of Blackthorn Manor, the storm could not touch them. Chapter 7: Fire and Ash. It began with smoke. Evelyn woke in the dead of night, the acrid sting in her throat, the faint crackle beneath the roar of silence. She sat upright, clutching her shift, her heart pounding. Then the scream of a servant pierced the halls. "Fire! The manor is burning!" In an instant she was on her feet, the floorboards already hot beneath her slippers. She threw on a cloak and ran into the corridor. The air was thick with smoke, shadows leaping on the walls as flames licked up from below. Servants rushed past in panic, some carrying buckets, others clutching children, all fleeing as the great house of Blackthorn was swallowed in orange and black. "Sebastian!" she cried, her voice roar against the choking haze. And then she saw him. He came striding through the smoke like a figure of iron, his coat thrown over his shoulders, his face streaked with soot, but his eyes blazing. In his hand gleamed the sword she had seen mounted in the great hall, a relic of wars long past, now drawn for the final battle. He seized her hand, pulling her against him. "Stay with me, do not let go." The ceiling above groaned, timbers cracking, sparks cascading down like stars gone mad. But even as the manor crumbled, a voice slithered through the inferno, cold and triumphant. "If I cannot have her," it hissed, "no one shall." Redgrave emerged from the smoke, his fine clothes blackened, his eyes wild with hatred. He drew his own blade, its steel gleaming with firelight. Sebastian stepped forward, his body shielding Evelyn. His voice was a growl, stripped to its essence. "Then come and claim your death." The clash rang out, sharp and merciless. Steel struck steel, sparks flying amidst the embers. Redgrave fought like a man possessed, his strikes vicious, fueled by obsession and rage. "You think she chose you?" he spat between blows. "She is nothing but what we make her." Sebastian's fury ignited. "She is more than you will ever comprehend." Their blades locked, faces inches apart, firelight flickering over sweat and ash. With a savage cry, Sebastian broke free, his sword carving through the smoky air. The duel raged across the grand hall as flames devoured the portraits of ancestors, the tapestries, the history of Blackthorn. Evelyn stood pressed against the wall, coughing, tears streaming, watching the two men fight not just for her, but for the very soul of what life meant. A beam crashed down, shattering at Redgrave's feet. He stumbled. For the briefest moment his balance faltered, and Sebastian struck. The blade pierced true. Redgrave's eyes widened, disbelief painted across his soot-streaked face. He staggered back, blood blooming across his chest. With a final curse torn from his throat, he collapsed amid the burning ruin. The Viscount of Shadows was no more. Sebastian turned, chest heaving, his face carved with both victory and grief. He reached for Evelyn, sweeping her into his arms as the fire roared closer. "Hold to me," he commanded, his voice raw. She clung to him, burying her face against his neck as he carried her through the collapsing halls. Smoke stung her eyes, sparks rained down, and still he pressed forward, through doorways warped by heat, past staircases cracking beneath their weight. At last, they burst through the great doors into the cold night air. Behind them, the manor blazed like a pyre, centuries of Blackthorn legacy crumbling to ash. The sky glowed red, smoke rising like the ghosts of the past itself. Sebastian set her down upon the grass, but he did not release her. He held her close, his hand cradling the back of her head, his eyes reflecting both fire and salvation. "I've lost it all," he whispered hoarsely. "The halls, the name, the stones, everything." Evelyn lifted her gaze to him, tears shining through soot. "Not all?" He blinked, as though her words were a lifeline thrown into the storm. "You have me," she said simply, fiercely. "You saved me, Sebastian, and in you I found more than I ever dreamed. Do you not see? You have not lost. you have won." The flames roared higher, devouring the world they had known. But in her eyes he saw no ruin, he saw redemption, he saw salvation. He bent his forehead to hers, his voice breaking. "Then let the past burn. From the ashes we will build anew." And there, with the fire casting its final light over them, they sealed the promise, not of titles, not of legacies, but of hearts bound unbreakably together. Chapter 8. Forever. Not a night London remembered. At first, the scandal spread like wildfire. The tale of Evelyn Hart, the courtesan who had vanished, and of Lord Blackthorne, whose ancestral manor had gone up in flames with whispers of a duel and death. For weeks, drawing rooms and clubs hummed with speculation. Some sneered, some pitied. But as the months passed, the mockery softened into something else. For though fortune and title could falter, devotion endured. Evelyn and Sebastian did not rebuild the manor. Its charred stones stood as a monument to what had been consumed and left behind. Instead, they restored a cottage on the Blackthorne lands, a place where ivy climbed the walls and roses bloomed where ash once lay. It was not grandeur, but it was theirs. On a quiet spring morning, Evelyn stood in the garden, sunlight warming her face as she brushed her fingers over new blossoms. Behind her, Sebastian slipped his arms around her waist, his presence steady, unshakable. She leaned into him, her hands resting over his, a peace in her heart she had never known. "You once asked me what tomorrow would bring," she whispered, her voice soft against the birdsong. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his breath warm against her hair. "And now," he murmured, the question a gentle echo of their beginning. She turned in his arms, her eyes shining like dawn. A smile curved her lips, tender, certain, unafraid. "Now," she said, her voice steady as a vow. "Tomorrow is ours, always." For a moment the world fell away, the weight of past chains, the ashes of fire, the whispers of society. There was only the garden, the sunlight, and the man who held her as though she were the very heart of his soul. And when he kissed her, it was not the claim of one who had purchased her for a night, nor the desperate grasp of one who feared to lose. It was the vow of a man who had given everything, fortune, name, pride, and gained eternity in return. Together they walked forward, not into scandal, not into ruin, but into forever.